Hello and welcome to Autology, the weekly podcast that brings you the latest on automotive technology. This week's episode is called The Charge to Change, Embracing the Electric Future of Transportation. And you're here with me, Rebecca Bell-Chambers, and Chris Heron, Secretary General of eMobility Europe, alongside Claudio Vittori, Charging and eMobility Components Research at S&P Global Mobility. Hello to you both, and thank you so much for joining me on this week's episode of Autology.
Hi, Rebecca. Great to be here.
Thank you.
Hi, Rebecca. Thanks for having us today.
Thanks, Claudio. So before we dive into our subject matter, I think a brief introduction is necessary. So while Claudio is one of our experts at S&P Global Mobility and will be very familiar to a lot of our listeners, Chris, it'd be great if maybe you could give an explanation as to who you are, what your role is, the background on your work at eMobility Europe.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Rebecca. So I'm Chris Heron. I'm the Secretary General of the newly launched eMobility Europe since just 1 and a bit weeks. Formerly AVER, which is the Association for the E-Mobility Ecosystem in Europe. We're based in Brussels, and our role is to be an interface to the policymakers here for the wider e-mobility ecosystem. We have about 80 members within our association. They cover vehicle manufacturers, charging infrastructure providers, the supply chain, fleet owners, and all of the national EV associations. And the logic we have is that bringing together this collective ecosystem is necessary to put forward proactive policy solutions to help everything in Brussels and this ambitious trajectory we have until 2035 zero emission car sales goals. Our mission is to advocate for policies that ensure a successful transition for Europe to electric vehicles in a way that's benefiting both our people and society, but also the industries we have here in Europe and want to build up. Personally, for me, I've been working around the electric vehicle supply chain for the last 13, 14 years, all the time in Brussels for different trade associations. I started my career working for the battery industry. I spent the last 10 years working for the raw material supply chain. And now with eMobility Europe, it's a chance to work for this entire ecosystem. It's a really exciting time with all of the EU's CO2 limits under discussion at the moment, and a big push from the European Union to improve the competitiveness of its electric vehicle value chain. So I'm really excited to be part of that change. Last thing to mention, there is an association with a long history. It was founded in 1978. I always like to think what the association must have looked like back then, talking about electric vehicle issues. Now we've rebranded. We felt it was a time for a change because we really want to be a modern, forward-looking association ready to play an impactful role in this transition. And yeah, happy to talk to you in this new name of eMobility Europe.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chris. It's a pleasure to have you here and really excited to hear some of the insights that you're able to share with us. So, as mentioned, this week's podcast focuses on the electrification of future transportation. And the year 2024 has proven to be quite a challenging one for the automotive industry, as we all know, and particularly in terms of electric vehicle adoption. I think despite these hurdles, future expectations do remain positive, with projections indicating that there will be over 200 million battery electric vehicles in operation by 2030. So I think a first question to consider here is, are consumers ready for this shift? And I guess what are the future expectations for this level of adoption? So maybe, Chris, you could start us off.
Yeah, we definitely expect 2025 will be a much more positive and really important year for electric vehicle sales. There are a number of factors built into making 2024 a challenging year in terms of sales for many projections. The first and most important of which is that the EU CO2 limits for cars go up a notch in 2025. And so a lot of the industry has been waiting until this year to push new electric vehicle models ready to make that target. So we do expect a big sales push this year to help meet the 2025 CO2 limits that car makers have to meet. And it's really exciting to see all of the new electric car models that are coming onto the market this year, including, I think, 7 new models under 25,000 euros, which is going to unlock a whole new consumer bracket for those looking for a more affordable EV option. Second thing happening last year, which really hurt the market, was Germany's removal of subsidies in quite an abrupt way at the start of the year. Germany being a very important, sizable market in Europe, this had a very big effect in weighing down sales. And so this year and onwards, we're hoping that governments are learning lessons from that and putting in place more stable, smarter incentives to help support consumers with EV uptake. So from our perspective, we expect, an uptick in sales by the end of this year. And we really think that the CO2 limits and the regulatory stability that they provide are an important part of driving that. One thing I should say is that the CO2 limits are under a lot of political discussion at the moment in Brussels. There have been concerns expressed from some of the European car makers about the fines that they may or may not face by the end of the year. And the Commission is evaluating whether it will add flexibilities into these CO2 limits or not. I think that will be very consequential in determining how big the upswing in EV sales will be, because at the moment there's a big incentive for all car makers to really push EVs this year with good discounts, with other factors. And if the regulatory pressure is going to change, then maybe that some of that incentive shifts too. At the start of last week, we released a little market study looking into expectations for the year. We have two scenarios, one with the CO2 limits remaining in place, one where they're taken away. And the difference between the two scenarios was about 450,000 electric cars on the EU market. So how those political discussions go will have a very important role to determining how big we push through this year. As an association, our preference would be that we all make a big effort to go all in on electric vehicles in 2025, focus on getting the right incentives in place at the national level, supporting that from the EU where possible, and keeping a healthy market pressure so we do make sure this year is one where we get back on track to our electric vehicle goals.
Yeah, Chris, that's I think very insightful, and having you in the podcast is very strong to have your insight into what is happening in Brussels and what is expected to be, the next wave of electrification. On our end, I mean, of course, I mean, as most of our clients already know, we have a very strong consumer survey that we launch every year that covers about 8,000 respondents over the globe and covering in the major 8 regions in terms of electrifications. And this is quite helpful because on year we have a kind of the understanding of how the consumers are reacting towards electrification, electric vehicles in general, about charging infrastructure, and few other features in terms of autonomous cars, etc., for example. And it's quite impressive because when you go through the list of the 3 main reasons for not purchasing electric vehicles or plug-in electric vehicles, I mean, it's quite relevant because 2 out of 3 are related to EV charging. So EV charging is still perceived today one of the major bottlenecks for not going electric. And it's also quite interesting because what in the beginning, when I joined the industry about 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, I mean, one of the major reason for not buying an EV was the range. So now the situation seems to be quite solved in terms of the most of the consumers, but EV charging remains a barrier. And of course, the situation changes slightly when you go region by region, but in general, that's a key highlight. It's also quite interesting to see when you go in depth of the consumers, you can also realize that how the situation changes when it comes to people exposed to the technology. So someone who is already driving a car or has been exposed to driving in EVs, the confidence towards existing infrastructure is higher, much higher than all the people, coming closer to the technology. I would say on average, we are still like less than 40% on average of the consumers feeling confident about EV charging infrastructure being sufficient. When you go to people exposed, it easily crossed the 50-60%. Good news is that we, in our consumer survey, we also have our forward-looking views. We are asking questions about what do you think about the next 5 to 10 years horizon, how the situation might change. And the consumers are in general quite optimistic because across all the consumers type, the confidence about the deployment of charging infrastructure is quite good. And on average, we are going up to 50, 60, 70% of consumers feeling more comfortable. Which is probably a good foundation of what you said about the expectation for the next year and the years to come.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think our consumer surveys are such a critical point in understanding, what consumers' incentives are, and really it's the consumers that are driving this demand, or a large part of why this demand is changing. So it's so important to realise what they're thinking. So as you say, Claudio, we're seeing a lot of push from all sides of the industry for electric vehicles and the deployment of charging stations. But how is the deployment of current charging infrastructure progressing? And what do we foresee for the future? Maybe Claudio, you can go first.
Yeah, I can pick up probably the question first. I mean, because we, of course, we are probably the company managing the more data on that. So we have a kind of our understanding about the situation is evolving and how the situation might evolve into the next decade or so. I would say that the installation is keeping up. I mean, if you look at our numbers in 2024, there are some countries that have grown significantly, Germany, France, UK, and the situation in Europe is relatively good with the overall infrastructure growing. Of course, I mean, we have a very, tangible difference on a country by country situation, as it happens for EVs too, right? So we have a deployment which changes variably. And when you look into the ratio of cars for example, for BEVs and DC charging infrastructure, the situation changes importantly. And but when it comes to the 2030 and beyond, we are expecting a sort of of standardization of the ratio with a more solid establishment of DC charging stations in general charging infrastructure. We are expecting a sort of about 30% of growth rate expected between 2023 last year and 2030, with UK, which is already and is expected to somehow lead a little bit the deployment of charging stations, with about 35 million of charging stations that will be installed across all the domains, so which basically includes domestic, workplace, public, and semi-public, including the high power charger um, um, stations. Of course, it goes a little bit without saying that as today, as it was in the past, most of the charging sessions will remain at home. So the domestic infrastructure will remain an essential, element of, EVs deployment and charging infrastructure, equipment to get, to keep up with with EVs deployment. About between 70 and 90% of sessions will remain there, and this gives you the impression of how important it's going to be. Of course, apart from that, and we are expecting that 30 millions of charging stations will be installed. A part of that, of course, as I mentioned briefly, there is a portion of charging infrastructure that will support, the consumers for the unconventional trips, for the longer trips, and which are somehow connected to the main routes or the highways. This is going to be part of our DC charging infrastructure, which in the grand scheme of things will remain kind of niche portion. We are talking about very limited amount of charging stations, but of course these will still show an incredible growth, because we are passing from about 90,000 charging stations today to more than 500,000 stations expected over the next 7 years. So the infrastructure will grow. Hopefully, will also support the EVs deployment in a proper manner.
I would agree with a lot of what Claudio said there. It's really interesting always comparing perception from consumers with what the data tells us of how charging installation is happening. And the data looks quite good in terms of the fact that we are steadily increasing our charging infrastructure rollout across member states. The EU has set minimum targets in its AFIR regulation, which are being exceeded now in 26 out of 27 member states. So the industry is going further than requirements, and we need to look at that moving forwards. As Claudio said, data I was looking at said 13 million charging points by the end of this year, if things go very well, 35 million or so by 2030. So we will expect that continued rollout and increase, which is good for drivers. There are also socioeconomic benefits as well for Europe, because we estimate that Europe will be employing 220,000 workers across its charging industry by 2030, 2035, which is a really key part of this jobs equation we have in this transition as well. I think when we as a policy organization look at bottlenecks, we say it still takes too long to get permits for these charging installations. We could be going a lot faster as an industry if the permit granting was as fast in Europe as it is in other parts of the world. And as we move forwards, we have to look at constraints from the grids and where that will continue to impact us or not as we move forwards. So there are definitely some policy levers that can be pulled to make this quicker. I also mentioned before that the EU's CO2 limits and their regulatory stability are quite important for the ecosystem. That's especially true for the charging industry, because they're planning their investments based on the volume of electric vehicles they are expecting to be on the road. So any pushback on our ambition in Europe will have a chilling effect on investments in the charging industry too. So we have to look at this space. But I think companies are investing capital, they're ready to go, and they're ready to build it up. It's also very interesting. We mentioned geographical diversity and where charging infrastructure is going ahead, going behind. I was in a really interesting workshop this week on the Central Eastern European region where there was an hypothesis that charging was the big bottleneck to EV uptake in Central Eastern Europe. Actually, when you look at the data, the penetration of DC chargers is much higher per EV in Central Eastern Europe than it is in Western Europe. So it's really the availability of affordable cars in these regions for people to buy that is holding things back. So we also have that chicken and egg program of how can we get affordable EVs into the hands of consumers and then convince them from driving these EVs that charging experience isn't as much of a barrier as we think. And that's maybe the last thing to mention is the perception versus the reality. We hear a lot as well, and we see a lot. There's misinformation in the media a lot about charging, and there's a lot of fears about how it could work for individual use cases. The reality is, if you have a driveway, if you have a charger installed at home, and you're in a country where the infrastructure is there and it's out, then I would say it is sufficient to meet needs. But how do you get consumers to experience that and be eased, like you said, because those who experience it do find that. Maybe one last thing that, I mean, as an EV driver, what I find, it's not, can I find a charger that's the issue? It's, is the charger going to be reliable for me? Will it be closed? Will it be used? Will it be delivering what I expect it to? So maybe not availability of charging infrastructure, but the reliability of what's offered is really what consumers with EVs need now to be sure of the way forwards. So lots to discuss there. But if I were to conclude, I would say charging infrastructure rollout is going well. We need to keep the regulatory stability there so it continues to go well. And we need to help work with consumers to reassure them that they can have a good use case for charging their vehicles in a good way.
Sure, yeah. And I just want to echo what you said at the end there. I think charging infrastructure rollout is going well. We're certainly moving in the right direction. But if I just pull us back to the consumer survey, and Claudio mentioned that 2 out of 3 of the responses to why people aren't purchasing electric vehicles are charging related. The other aspect is charging times, right? So Claudio, maybe you could talk us through some of the key factors that contribute towards the enhancement of charging times for electric vehicles, and additionally, how can these improvements not only streamline the charging process but also lead to a significantly better overall charging experience for the consumers?
Yeah, Rebecca, you're right. Well, there is a huge topic about, the infrastructure being sufficient or not, let's say, and this somehow has been already answered by our consumer survey. The second point is that over the next few years, we also need to be sure that, the experience of around charging will be improved in terms of timing, in terms of efficient infrastructure. And there are some advancements that we are observing into the industry that can lead to a more positive and more efficient, time charging process, especially when it comes to, the time required for charging. I think the innovation will come around the three major elements. Of course, the answer might take many more hours than what we have for the podcast today. But if I can summarize, maybe there are 3 major aspects that we are expecting to be behind the corner that can really have an important impact when it comes to charging. The first one is battery-wise. We are expecting, the chemistry and the cathode material to get, to bring a high level of innovation when it comes to, making the charging experience more efficient. And this refers to the well-known solid-state batteries. That's something that we are expecting to come in the industry around 2028, so in the second half of the decade. That said, there is already semi-solid state battery that are on the market, and so this is something that is already, bringing a lot of innovation and efficiency in terms of having a more seamless experience while charging. The second part is related to the type of semiconductor. We have seen over the last couple of years a very important shift of the industry moving from, for example, silicon to silicon carbide solution. And when it comes to the overall vehicle efficiency, this has grown in particularly. Of course, we are observing this trend happening first into somehow the premium brands, and then we are expecting that to become adopted into the mass vehicles later on. But of course, this is going to be a very important innovation when it comes to the general efficiency of the cars and facilitating a new, better charging experience. last but not least, we are also seeing most of the OEMs moving towards high voltage platforms. These will basically facilitate, the possibility of the cars to achieve a higher power rate. And so if we can combine an higher starting point when you connect your car at a charging station, so maybe up to 400 kilowatt at a peak power, and throughout, and we can maintain these peak power for a longer time, leveraging a couple of the other factors that I mentioned now, we can definitely reduce and condense, the charging process into a shorter and more efficient time. Yeah, that's it. But I'm sure that Chris has also a very insightful view on that.
Perception's always funny again. I'm in the user bracket of a young father with 3 young kids. So my EV charging times are very sufficient. It's the kid bathroom times which are delaying me on my journeys around. So I'm never in a position where I wish I could charge my car faster on the way. But of course, a lot of technology is happening to make that speed up. Solid state batteries, voltages, etc. I think it's also interesting all the innovations are going around that to just make it a really good experience charging and a seamless experience. We have members in our association working on things like plug and charge, where you drive in, you plug in, it charges, there's no payment interface, very easy as a consumer, and a clear step forward in terms of what we're used to in terms of the petrol stations and other things. So for me, it's this transition is also a chance to reimagine how we are doing this. We don't have to follow the model of the internal combustion engine. Use all of the technology around us to make sure it's easy, enjoyable, and seamless for consumers. Charging time for sure is a part of that, but just making it reliable, easy, and no barriers, I think, is going to keep people happy and enthusiastic as well. One thing, just to pivot a bit, that we work a lot on is eMobility Europe as well, is where do these technologies come from? So Claudio mentioned solid state batteries are an important innovation that will reduce charging time. Just a big wider question that Europe has is, are we going to develop our own industrial leadership in delivering some of these technologies for the electric vehicles? Because that's a big part of making sure that this transition is not just working for consumers, but also working for the industries, the workers we have here in Europe, who we need to keep employed in good, high quality jobs. Last year was a difficult year with the bad news about Northvolt, a lot of shakes and rocks to some of the investment plans we have in battery startups. So I think going forward, it's a really important discussion that we need to have. How will Europe produce some of these technologies itself? Is it feasible that Europe does so alone for things like solid state, where we do have a lot of innovative companies? Or are we going to need to partner with more experienced players from Asia and other jurisdictions? If partnership is the way forwards, then there's a very important policy discussion to be had too about how do we make sure that the partnerships and the investments that come are working for Europe and working for our companies as well. And it's not just parachuting in and installing factory and the rest of the value is happening elsewhere. So I think just on a policy side, there's some very important rules coming up from the European Commission to set the requirements for these investments. A while ago, at least with China, they set very clear rules for European car makers to come and do business there. We're looking forward to see what the European Union's response will be, and if it's also going to put rules in place for joint ventures, technology transfer, and win-win collaborations between partners. So, of course, we're focusing a lot on consumers in this podcast, but I think when we're talking about technology evolution as well, there's this wider discussion. How can we make sure it works for our workers and our economy as well? And in Brussels, I expect that to be a high priority discussion as we move forwards. So complex, but really crucial years, not just to bring EV uptake, but make sure we have the industries as well.
Absolutely. No, I do agree. So just moving on now. So with the upcoming Electric Vehicle Symposium 38 set to take place this year, how do you envision this event influencing the trajectory of electric vehicle adoption and the infrastructure development in the global market? And I think specifically we want to touch on what the key themes and the innovations that you can anticipate maybe are going to be emerging from the symposium. Or that could shape these consumer perceptions and also the policy making and technical advancements in the electric mobility sector.
Yeah, we're really excited for EVS this year. It's happening in Europe for the first time since, I think, 2022, 2023. It's happening in Gothenburg in Sweden, which is an amazing part of Europe. We have the full value chain for electric vehicles under development. We've got trucks, we've got cars, we've got batteries, we've got materials. So I'm really excited to bring all of that together for the must-have event for the e-mobility ecosystem globally. Having it in Europe this year is important because I think it's a chance for us as a community to give a positive message to the community that we'll have there, the businesses, the politicians, the academics, and to show that although it has been a tricky period for EV uptake, tricky year for all of the geopolitics, there is a lot of ambition, a lot of innovation happening to ensure that we're driving this forwards. So we've got a great program. We've got discussions on competitiveness, on truck rollout, on circularity, on innovation, autonomous driving and technology, all packed along a 3-day program. And we'll have an exhibition of over 300 exhibitors ready to show some of these innovations, everything from the vehicles to the charging to some of the technologies around that. So would really welcome everyone to make the effort, come to Gothenburg for these 3 days. Let's send a collective signal that the EV transition is on track. It's exciting. And in Europe, we're going to push forward the innovation to make it happen for us. I'm really excited to have S&P Global as well partnering with us for making this a full success.
Okay, yeah, great, Chris. Rebecca, if I can chime in, just to reinforce a little bit the message. I mean, EVS will be back in Europe this year, and S&P is truly think that this is going to be the event for the reference event for the electrification for this year and the years to come. And this is one of the reasons why we decided to support, more importantly, EVS this year. We are having a booth at the conference where we can host all the clients and partners that want to have a chat with us about how we are seeing the trend of electrification taking place for the next few years. We are going to be also part of the main stage, presenting some of our key insights, and I will be personally speaking at the Agora session, having a deep dive on the EV charging infrastructure. So I will be more than glad to meet all the partners that will be in Gothenburg for the 3 days. We are also very excited to be to work with you, Chris, and the E-Mobility Europe, where we are trying to team up a little bit, and we would like to support you with all the necessary insights that will help you on facilitating all the stakeholders coming, and to try to convince the industry that the electrification is keeping up, and we can go for the same message. So yeah, really look forward to seeing you all guys in Gothenburg in June.
Yeah, we've got some exciting speakers getting confirmed all the time. It's great. We've got the Deputy Prime Minister of Sweden. We've got ministers from the Netherlands, from Belgium, from France being confirmed. And we've got C-level representatives from a load of great companies, Volvo Cars, Volvo Trucks, Polestar, Einride, Rise, the list goes on, Siemens, e-mobility, and that's going to get going and expand over time. So I think it's going to be a really high-level executive discussion. We're going to have great market insights from you, and yeah, we're going to really focus on the substance of what's needed to drive this forwards. And certainly what I've experienced in my time with e-mobility Europe is there's a need for good data, also for us in our discussions with policymakers to reassure them and to penetrate some of the misinformation which is floating around in the electric vehicle debate all the time. So I'm also very hopeful that this is a partnership that can deliver as good value as we move forwards.
Great. Well, thank you, guys. It sounds like EVS 38 will be the place to be in June this year, so make sure you don't miss out. So thank you to you both. Unfortunately, that is all we have time for today. So just want to echo a big thank you to both of you for joining us on Autology.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our listeners as well for tuning in. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode at autology@spglobal.com email address, and you can find out much more at our autotechinsight.spglobal.com website. Don't forget to hit all of the subscribe, follow and like buttons to stay on track with the latest Autology podcasts, and we look forward to you joining us again in the next episode. Bye for now.